right, in today's session, this is our makeup class for Tuesday. We're going to continue our discussion of risk management and today get into some of the mathematics of risk management. Before we do that though, let's finish up our discussion from last class. I was giving you a summary of an article by Glenn Holton called Enterprise Risk Management, where he says there's three important components of a good risk management process in a firm. The first is culture that we talked about last class. We finished that last class, and then the last two are procedures and technology. You can see from the discussion the importance of procedures is that it empowers people so they do not have to take personal risk to point out a risk. They point out a risk that someone else in the firm is taking. They don't have to risk losing their job or contradicting their boss. They can simply say the procedures do not allow this. Procedures need to be continually monitored and changed because they can become out of date. They can also become overly burdensome and almost incomprehensible because of just the volume of them. So it's a real trick to create procedures that are manageable and actually useful for reducing risk. A lot of organizations start with their procedures by saying, well, what do our regulators require? But the problem with that is regulators are focused on minimizing risk, not optimizing the value of the firm. So that can be a dangerous approach. But once you have those procedures and you have the culture, then, and not before then, you talk about spending money on technology to help you monitor what's going on in the organization. Some firms buy the technology first and try to fit the culture and the procedures into the technology. But it's better to figure out exactly what you want to accomplish with risk management in your firm and then purchase the technology. There's a lot of technology out there. Some of it's quite complex, quite advanced, but it's only as good as the inputs and of the culture of the firm. So let's turn now to, since we saw the elements of a good risk management process in a firm, let's look at the actual process itself. And this is a pretty typical process that most firms follow, something similar to it at least. The first step is mission identification. The next is risk and uncertainty assessment. And then under the category of mitigation, we have risk controls and risk financing. And so looking through that list, the first thing, mission identification. Here, it's simply the firm determining why does it exist. What are those most critical aspects of the firm that you want to protect? If you're taking a risk that is not part of the core process of the firm, then maybe it's a risk the firm needs to stop and avoid that risk. So understanding why the firm exists is extremely important, not just for corporation risk, but also for personal risk. What are those goals that you want to achieve in your life as a corporation or as a person that could be derailed by risk? And are you taking risks that are unnecessary in order that really won't help you achieve that mission? Once you know why you exist, then you can start assessing the risks that you have. The first one is risk identification. We'll talk about that more here a little bit later and have an actual list of risk. But you identify those activities or conditions that can create a likelihood of loss. What are those hazards that you're exposed to, such as a worker being injured or equipment being damaged, the organization's reputation being damaged. Perils are those external risks that you have. You have internal risk as well, employees. And so perils, both external and internal, can create exposures or can harm your exposures, which are exposures are your assets and liabilities. Perils, both internal and external, can harm assets, causing them to fall, or create liabilities, causing them liabilities to rise, like lawsuits. Once you've identified your universe of risk, then you do a risk analysis and try to understand how those perils and those hazards interact with the exposures to create a loss. And then what we'll be spending quite a bit of time on is the risk measurement piece of it. In terms of frequency and severity, we're going to look at frequency in terms of the probability of something happening, and then severity, when it happens, how much can you lose? So the concept of frequency and severity apply to all aspects of risk management, not just in finance, but in many other areas of business. So thinking about the probability of something happening and when it happens, how severe is it? For example, when you buy car insurance, you ask, what's the probability that you might total your car? Let's say you say that's 0.5%. Let's say your car is worth $30,000. So your expected loss equals frequency times severity. So your expected loss then is 0.005, that 0.5%, times $30,000, frequency times severity equals $150, which means if this is true of your driving and all you can do is total your car, you can't just damage it partially, either have no damage to your car or you completely total it, then your expected loss is $150, which that is the minimum an auto insurance company will charge you in order to insure your car, because on average they expect people with your driving habits and driving your type of car on average will lose them $150. If this is, say, on an annual basis, you have a 0.5% in any given year, then the insurance company would charge at least $150. So again, expected loss equals frequency, the 0.005 times severity. We're going to see later that we're going to call this a value at risk, a VAR, at a 0.5% equals $30,000. So what we mean, 0.5% of the time, we expect a $30,000 loss. So the expected loss is frequency times severity. The value at risk is that severity at that frequency. And so we'll be doing a lot of practice on this. So once we have good risk measurement, we can then see, wow, where are our risks? Where are we most exposed to loss? And then what we can do is start mitigating those risks. And the way we can mitigate risk is we can do it internally by doing risk control, or we can bring in a partner and do risk financing. Risk control is in terms of risk avoidance, risk prevention, or risk reduction. Risk avoidance, you see here the example, fill in the pool. If someone has a pool in their backyard and they don't want the risks that maybe a neighborhood kid will drown in the pool or some other liability risk, if they want to completely avoid that risk, they just fill in the pool with concrete. If the risk is core to your business, you can't practice risk avoidance. For example, an airline cannot practice risk avoidance when it comes to the risk of a plane crashing. But if it's not part of your core business, then risk avoidance can be a very good practice. Now, if you can't practice risk avoidance, then you have risk prevention. This is when you're trying to reduce frequency. These are your compliance and procedures, activities. It'd be like putting a fence around the pool. You reduce the frequency or the chance that someone will get in your backyard and actually fall in the pool and drown. And then risk reduction, you're trying to reduce severity. You might learn CPR. So if someone does fall in your pool and you find them and the ambulance takes a long time to get there, you can maybe save their life by learning CPR, reduces the severity. Well, a good example of this is Tylenol. Tylenol had an event where someone laced its medication with poison, killed several people. The risk already happened, so they couldn't practice risk prevention at that point. They already had a loss, so they practiced risk reduction. So given that the events already happened, what can I do to reduce the risk? And what Tylenol is very famous for is using public relations, not only to reduce the risk and severity, but actually even get some benefits to their corporate perspective by the public, and actually get some positive vibes from the media and from many articles written by Tylenol and what a good job they did in handling that particular situation.